The Carpenter and the Cradle, A History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Worden. Read by the author. Chapter 40. Fern raced into the parking lot of Peggy's diner. Hallelujah, there was the police car right where she'd been hoping and praying it would be. Thank heavens Constable Gray was a creature of habit. You could practically set your watch by him picking up his dinner at Peggy's diner right around this time, and he hadn't failed her. The officer was emerging from the restaurant just as Fern dropped her bike on the sidewalk in front of the diner. "You've got to come," she gasped out. "There's been a kidnapping. I can lead you right to the place where the girl was grabbed and pulled into the car. If we hurry, maybe you can catch him before he gets too far." She had to hand it to the constable. He asked no questions but flew into action, all business immediately, dinner time forgotten. Fern's desperation must have been apparent. "In the front," he commanded her, opening the passenger door. "But you have to promise me if we spot the abductor, you stay put, no matter what. I need you for information, but I won't have you endangering yourself." "I promise," she shouted. Constable Gray whipped the car into a tight 180, lights flashing and the siren blaring. "Which way?" he rapped out at the entrance to the parking lot of the diner. Fern gave him the street name where her parents' property was, and he roared off in that direction. "Any details you can think of?" he demanded. Fern gave him a brief description of the man and the dark green car he'd been driving, along with the license plate number. "Nice work," the cop took the time to praise admiringly. He spat the information into his radio as he drove, calling for backup. In under 3 minutes, they approached the place where Georgie had been taken. "Where to from here?" Constable Gray asked Fern. "Did you see him take off? Which direction was he going?" Fern pointed in the direction that the car had been pointing, the opposite direction from the direction she'd taken to go back into Beaver Row to get help. She hadn't watched to make sure that was the direction in which the man had driven off, but he hadn't passed her, so it must have been, she concluded. "Ha! Good!" the officer gloated. "He's heading for the open highway then, the road to Cherryton. There are a few side roads between here and Cherryton, but nothing, really. I can get onto the Cherryton unit, and if we meet up without having seen him, we can split up and take all the back roads between here and there. None of them lead to any towns, just private farms and residences. We've got his license plate and description. He can't get far." "Stop!" Fern yelled suddenly. The car screeched to a halt in the gravel of the shoulder. "I see the car," she shouted. "There, pulled off. Off to the side of that road. He tried to hide it in the shrubbery." "Well spotted," the officer said. "The green makes it hard to see. Good thing you were watching out. Now remember what I said about staying put and keep your head down. Get right down on the floor. I'm going to go check things out, see if they're still in the car or if he's dragged her off somewhere." He exited the car carefully, one hand on his holster, keeping under cover as much as possible. Fern heard a muffled scream from the direction of the green car. It broke off as though someone had forcibly silenced it with a hand over the mouth. She ignored the instructions to keep her head down and kept her eyes strained in the direction of the green car in the bushes. Then a window of the car opened, and Fern heard, "Help me, please! He's unarmed! Just come get me! Help!" And again the muffling of a hand over the mouth. The back passenger's door opened, and Georgie's legs were visible out of it, kicking and struggling, but her captor seemed to still have a hold of her, and she couldn't get away. At the words, "He's unarmed," the police officer wasted no time in storming the green car, his own gun clasped tightly in both hands, pointing at the driver's seat. Fern couldn't follow every piece of the action with the constable's body hiding all sight of the man who'd taken Georgie. But Fern was overjoyed to see Georgie running toward her and diving in the front seat of the police cruiser. She moved over as best as she could to make room, and Georgie hunkered down onto the floor below window height and sobbed brokenly. "Georgie, come here," Fern soothed. "It's okay, we've got you. You're safe now." She shushed Georgie and awkwardly tried to put one arm around her. "I just want to get out of here. Can we just get out of here?" she cried. "We likely have to wait for another cop to show up," Fern reasoned. "Constable Gray will have to stand guard over the guy until another car shows up to take him away. It won't be long, and then we'll get you home." You're okay, Georgie, you're okay. It's all over. You're safe now. Fern cradled the distraught girl and stroked her hair until she calmed down. Georgie was still shaking, but she managed to control her sobs, and she said to Fern, "That's him. That's the man who ran me down. He was driving a truck that day, but I'm quite sure that must have been him. I thought he was my stepdad because they look alike." "But who is he? Do you know him? If he wasn't your stepdad who ran you down, what reason would this guy have to do it?" "I don't know. He wouldn't say anything to me or tell me anything," Georgie answered. "Maybe he's related to my stepdad. They look like they could be. Maybe they're working together. I won't be safe until they're both behind bars and I get some answers. Fern, he was trying to drag me out of the car before you got here. I gave him as much trouble as I could, fighting and kicking and biting, but if you hadn't been so quick, he would have had a hold of me and taken me off somewhere. I can't even think about it." Her whole body convulsed in a shudder. "At least maybe now the authorities will believe that I actually am in danger and not just making up stories like a little kid needing attention." "No one will be able to deny that you were the victim of a hit and run and a kidnapping. Obviously, they'll have to put you in safe custody till the ones responsible are charged and put away," Fern comforted. Another police car arrived in a flood of light and sound, and within minutes Constable Gray was back in his seat and heading back to Beaver Row after checking to see that Georgie was okay and ushering both girls into the back seat. "We'll get you back safe and sound, Missy. Thanks to some quick work on the part of your friend there and her sharp eyes, you're going to be okay." June sat up in bed and listened with all her might. Was that the door to the bookshop opening and quiet footsteps on the stairs? Or was she imagining things? No, she definitely heard it. She rolled out of bed, trying not to wake July. She pushed the bedroom door that she'd left open a crack just for this eventuality and tiptoed out into the hallway. "Junie," her dad whispered when he saw her dark shape in front of him, "why aren't you asleep?" "Because I had to know what happened," she whispered back. "Well, he's fine. We found him all right. Took a little while and it was getting dark before we spotted him. But we got him located and into the hospital. He's going to be okay. It was a broken leg and maybe a couple cracked ribs, but he'll survive." "I can't say I feel too sorry for him," June said between her teeth. "Georgie had worse after her accident, though it wasn't an accident at all." Paul hesitated for a moment before answering. "Why is she so sure it was her stepfather that tried to run her down and tried to harm her the other times? We had a little chance to talk in the helicopter, and he seemed so genuinely puzzled as to why Coral would push him down the ravine. I tried to get to the bottom of things, just asking him a few questions, without giving anything away. I don't know, June. I think Georgie should give him a chance to explain himself, if we can find her. Maybe we can bring her to visit him in the hospital. She'll be in a safe environment there, but they can have a chance to talk it out." June flared up. "That's exactly why she ran away and couldn't ask anyone for help. No adults, at least. He's very good at convincing people he's such a great guy, Dad. He's a good actor. She knew no one would believe her. At least not any adults. They're all taken in by him." "Shh, June, lower your voice. And I'm not taken in. I just want to hear both sides of the story. I'm not handing Georgie back over to this man if there's any possibility she might be in danger. It's just that there might be other explanations than the conclusions she jumped to." "How could there be?" June raged. "She didn't hit herself with a car and drive away. She wasn't faking the broken bones. Someone tried to kill her. Who else could it have been?" "Well, that's what I'm wondering," Paul said in a tone much lower than June's excitable one. "Don't forget that there is another player to consider. You said that the man Coral saw through the binoculars was definitely not James McKay. He was more likely to be the one who stole the pack, seeing the reason you saw him at all was because you were watching the area where you found the pack. Seems like he was going back for it. We need to discover who he is before any of this can be cleared up, I think." "Yeah, but he couldn't be the one responsible for the other 2 incidents Georgie told us about. She was sure the only one who could have tried to kill her back in Scotland was her stepdad. He was the only one with the opportunity." "All I'm saying is, let's hear the evidence before we decide too hastily," Paul answered. "But it's late, and we both need our sleep, and if you haven't already woken up your sister, you soon will if we keep on standing out here talking. Good night, June. Sleep tight. Good night, Dad. June crawled back between the sheets, but her eyes wouldn't close. She stared up at the darkened ceiling and thought about her dad's words. It was a perspective she hadn't considered before. Was it disloyal to Georgie to consider it? Georgie had been so sure, but her dad made some good points, too. June's mind continued to race. The group of solemn faces that gathered at the nurses' station of the Cherryton Hospital was reminiscent of its earlier version when they'd come to see a little blue-eyed, curly-haired, anonymous stranger months earlier. There were notable additions to the group this time, however. April and all the Eccles girls were present, as were Caroline Lyons and her entire brood. June's heart warmed as she looked around at everyone there. Georgie should realize how loved and cared for she was when she saw the concern on every face. Victoria Stone, we kept her in overnight for examination this morning, the nurse informed them. It wasn't Janet Sorvino this time, but an unfamiliar nurse. But she wasn't hurt, just shaken up, so she's been released. Released? June, forgetting herself, nearly shouted in the nurse's face, who frowned disapprovingly at her. But she can't have been. Where'd she go? She's all on her own. She doesn't have anyone to go home to. I can't give you that information, the nurse informed them coldly. But our family, along with Lady Cromarty, were the last ones assigned with her custody. We have a right to know if anyone does. Surely the hospital didn't release a 15-year-old girl into her own care and custody. After her trauma? Paul growled at the nurse. No, of course not, the nurse snapped back. I can't give you any details, though. You'll have to be in touch with the police in charge of her case. I'm not authorized to give out information to just anyone who shows up at the hospital with any old story. June could see her dad's right ear glowing bright red, a dangerous sign. But he controlled himself, told the nurse that that was exactly what he would do, thanked her with an appearance of calm, though in a tone that said he wasn't exactly thankful or calm, but that he knew when there was no further use in trying, turned on one heel and strode back down the hospital corridor toward the exit, leaving the rest of the group scrambling behind him. Her stepfather is her legal guardian, Constable Gray repeated levelly for the third time through the plexiglass to the group in the foyer of the police station. We released her into his custody on her own recognizance and wishes. But that's impossible, June protested in tears. She wouldn't have gone with him willingly. She was terrified of him. He stared her down with steely eyes that matched his name. I questioned her thoroughly and alone. From the statements she'd made first when we interviewed her yesterday evening in the hospital, I was surprised too. She'd intimated to us that she didn't trust her stepfather and thought he was ultimately responsible for the kidnapping and the hit and run. But later this morning, she changed her mind apparently. She informed me that the situation had changed and that she wanted to go home to Penhurst with her stepfather, James McKay. With his injuries, she wanted to be there to look after him. Seeing he was being released this morning after his leg was in a cast, she wanted to go with him. I had no reason to hold her. She was very convincing. Signed her name to it and all. He must have some kind of hold on her to get her to do it. Threatened her somehow, Fern whispered to June. Yesterday on the way to the hospital after we found her, she was so scared she couldn't stop shaking. She was still scared of her stepdad, I'm sure. She realized he probably wasn't the one who tried to run her down in the car, and he wasn't the one who tried to kidnap her, but she still thought he was behind it. It doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense, June protested. June, her dad quieted her with one hand on her back. There's nothing more we can do here. Let's head for Penhurst. Get James McKay's address and surprise him on his doorstep. Maybe Georgie can explain it to us herself. If they're even there, June said, working herself into a borderline hysteria. Paul propelled her out the door of the police station with firm hands on her shoulders. She crumpled into her seat in the van, tears brimming over. How could they have failed Georgie so badly? To rescue her only to put her in danger again, and after all they'd promised her? There it was, the sacred cradle, looking just as he'd left it. It had extra significance to him now, though. It was no longer the symbol of mystery and power, and an object to be coveted for the sake of the rights it conveyed. It was the bed he'd been placed in as a baby. His mother, a woman he couldn't remember but who his curiosity about and his hunger for had never entirely gone away, had lined it with soft moss for his little body, laying him tenderly in it, covering him in a deer-hide tanned as soft as water, stooping to kiss his forehead. Maybe even his adopted father had, too. He traced the symbols on it reverently with one finger. Now that he knew what the symbols meant, he felt sure their meaning was the real power the sacred cradle and the other sacred pieces held. The knowledge that was meant to be passed down from father to son and mother to daughter. Maybe he'd be able to pass it down to his son along with the cradle. But first, he had work to be done. The cradle was no light burden, but Ko was young and strong. He carefully tied it with the straps he'd brought along for that purpose and hoisted it to his back. On his first mission to hide it until such time as it should be needed again, for his own son, he'd carried it farther the first time than he'd need to this time. He was halfway up the mountain already. But after he deposited the cradle, it would be the better part of a day's walk to get to the next place he was headed. And the sun was well up now. Any time now, Limo would notice he was missing, and shortly after, he expected a search party to be on its way. He'd better get a move on.